Hey everybody, this is the unit circle day one. Okay, so in your book, page 110, you have this chart. This tells you which values on the circle are what trig function. The sine is the y, the cosine is the x, the tangent is the y divided by the x, and these other three are the reciprocals. If you look at this unit circle that I provided you with, I also included those other values on the circle. Okay, so the x is the cosine, y is the sine, and the tangent values I calculated for you on the outside. The other three values, you're going to have to do the reciprocals when you solve them. Okay, let's look at number one. For each value, we're going to find the sine of s, the cosine of s, and the tangent of s. And in example one here, s equals pi over 2. So pi over 2 is the angle. S is the angle. So first find pi over 2. Okay, so pi over 2, what I'm looking for is the angle that represents pi over 2. Okay, so these are the degrees on the inside of the circle. You can see 0, 30, 45, etc. all the way around up to 360. And then you see the radians listed. 0, pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3. These are the radian measures that are the same as these angles. For example, pi over 4 is 45 degrees. 5 pi over 6 is 150 degrees, and so on. Okay, so I'm looking for pi over 2. Pi over 2 is 90 degrees. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the sine at 90 degrees. I can look back at this chart, which is also available on page 110. It's also available with the unit circle. And it says that the sine is the letter y on the circle. Okay, so I'm looking at pi over 2, which is 90, and I'm looking at that y, that's the sine value, and it's equal to 1. Cosine. The cosine is always the x on the unit circle. It's always the x. In the ordered pair x and y, it's always the x. Okay, so we are at pi over 2. We're looking for the cosine. Here's pi over 2. The cosine, according to this chart, is going to be the x. So that means my cosine is 0. Now, the tangent, according to this chart, is the y over the x, the y divided by the x. But I actually calculated those for you on the unit circle. I took 1, I divided by 0. If you do 1 divided by 0, you will see that it's undefined in your calculator. So undefined is the value of the tangent. And you can actually write that next to it, like so. Okay, and that's it. I mean, you're just identifying things on the circle. So let's try another one. Okay, we're looking for the sine of 7 pi over 6. So the first thing we want to do is find 7 pi over 6 on the circle. Okay, so we're looking at the radians, pi over 6, pi over 4. Just keep moving around the outside here until you see it. Here it is. It's 7 pi over 6. Okay, so I'm going to circle it. It is also known as 210 degrees. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the sine of 7 pi over 6. So I'm going to look back at my chart. It says that the sine is always the y value. So let's look at 7 pi over 6. The x was the negative root 3 over 2, and the y is negative 1/2. So the sine equals negative 1/2. This one's going to be a little bit trickier. You can find 4 pi over 3 on the circle, but this is negative. Negative 4 pi over 3 is not on the unit circle because it's negative. All of these angles are positive. If you go all the way around the circle, whether it's degrees or radians, you will see that all of these angles are positive. So before we find this trig value, we're going to have to find an angle that is coterminal. When we did these in degrees, we would add or subtract 360 degrees. Since we're using radians, we are going to add or subtract 2 pi. Again, it's one full rotation around the circle is 360 degrees or 2 pi. Okay, so I'm going to take this negative 4 pi over 3. It's negative, so I need to make it positive. So I'm going to add a full rotation, which in radians is 2 pi. Now I'm just going to be adding up a number that is a fraction with a number that isn't a fraction. So what I can do is I can make this into two fractions. When you are adding or subtracting fractions, you have to have a common denominator. I cannot multiply these or anything like that. The only thing I can do is add them together. But in order to add two fractions, the denominators need to be the same. So I'm going to highlight so you can see what I mean. This number has to match this number, which it definitely does not. So I can take this 1 right here and I can make it match by multiplying it by 3. Whatever you do to the bottom of the fraction, you're going to do the same to the top. Okay, so now watch what this does. This was originally 1, but 1 times 3 is 3. In the numerator, 2 pi times 3. 2 times 3 is 6. And I can just bring this first fraction down. Okay, I'm still adding them together. Let's go ahead and add them. -4 plus 6. See how they have common denominators now? So now you can add up the numerators. -4 plus 6 is 2 pi. And in the denominator, the 3 and the 3 still stays 3. Okay, let's look at the circle. See if you can find 2 pi over 3. Here it is. Okay, we're going to be using that in a second. Now, if you run into a scenario where this is not on the circle, then you would have to add again, and you could add 2 pi over 1, which will be 6 pi over 3. So you could continuously add this 6 pi over 3 until you get something on the circle. I know there's a question in the assignment where you have to add a couple of times. Okay, and we're still looking for the cosine. All right, so we're looking for the cosine of 2 pi over 3. The cosine is always the x. The cosine is the x. Okay, so we're looking for the x at 2 pi over 3, which we found out was 120 degrees. Look at the x. Here it is. It equals -1/2. Okay, 23 pi over 6, and we're looking for the secant. So let's first start looking for 23 pi over 6. Pi over 6, pi over 4, 5 pi over 6. I don't see it. Looks like the biggest we go is 11 pi over 6. And this technically would be 12 pi over 6, which is 2 pi. So it's not on there. Okay, so what that tells us is, again, we're going to have to find an angle that's coterminal. This time, this is a positive number versus last time it was a negative number and we added. If you have a positive number that's not on the circle, then that likely means this is a number that is too big. So what we're going to have to do is subtract a full rotation. Okay, so we have 23 pi over 6. And instead of adding the 2 pi, if it was a negative number, we're going to have to subtract 2 pi. Just like I did with the last question, I'm going to turn this into 2 pi over 1. So in order to subtract, I need to have a common denominator. So I want these two numbers at the bottom to be the same. Well, look at this one. It's a 6. So that means I'm going to change this side into a 6. And in order to do that, I'm going to multiply by 6. So just look at whatever you start with. That will be the number you can multiply by. So I'm going to multiply by 6, multiply by 6. I'm going to bring down this first fraction. So 23 pi over 6 is going to stay. And I'm going to multiply 2 pi times 6. 2 times 6 is 12 pi. And 1 times 6 is 6. Okay, I'm going to subtract 23 minus 12, and that equals 11 pi over 6. If this is not on the circle, then I will have to subtract this 12 pi over 6 again. Remember, this is really 2 pi over 1, but I made it into a common denominator which made it 12 pi over 6. So if this wasn't on the circle, I would just subtract the 12 pi over 6. Again, there is a question where you have to do several repeated subtractions or adding. Okay, so 11 pi over 6 is over here. It's 330 degrees. And we are looking for the secant. Okay, so let's look up secant. Secant is not one of these. This is cosine, this is sine, and the number outside is the tangent. According to our chart, which is on with the unit circle or on page 110, the secant is the same as 1 divided by the x. It's the same as 1 divided by x. Okay, so it's going to be 1 divided by whatever our x value is. And our x value is square root of 3 over 2. So now this is an algebra problem where we have to simplify this something dividing by a fraction. The rules for algebra say you can never divide by a fraction. Instead, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So keep the top, flip the bottom, okay? So we're not going to divide. Instead, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the bottom. Okay, so keep the top. We're going to multiply by the reciprocal. And you're going to flip, do the reciprocal of the bottom. So instead of the square root of 3 over 2, it's going to be 2 over root 3. 1 times 2 over root 3. Well, if you multiply 1 times anything, it ends up being that same number. And then you need to rationalize this denominator. So can't leave that square root of 3 at the bottom. You have to rationalize it. So this whole thing would equal 2 root 3 over 3. Okay, the last part of the assignment is going to be calculator problems. It says find a calculator approximation for each circular function value. Here's a note. We're working with radians now, so this needs to be in radian mode. So in your calculator, you want to go to mode, which is at the top of your calculator here, and see how mine's in degree. I need to change it back to radian. So I'm going to arrow down to the word radian, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so let me show you again what I hit. First, I'm hitting mode. It's right next to the blue second key. I'm going to arrow down until I'm on top of the word radian, and I'm going to hit enter. You may already be in radian mode. That's fine. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in sine 0.6109. And I'm going to round this to 4 decimal places. So it'll be 0.5736. Okay, let's look at the cosine, and we're going to type in cosine. When you type in the negative, make sure you're using the negative in the calculator, not the minus sign. You can see the red key that I pressed at the bottom, so that's the negative. So negative 1.1519. Again, use the negative at the bottom. Do not use the minus key on the side there. Okay, and you can see that I get 0.40675, so I'm going to round it to 0.4068. Okay, the next question is a cosecant, which we don't have the button for. So I'm going to flip back to my unit circle little chart, and I'm going to see what goes with the cosecant. Okay, so it's been a while since we've talked about this, but the cosecant always goes with the sine, and it's 1 divided by. So I'm going to have to do 1 divided by the sine in order to type it into my calculator. Okay, so I'm going to type this in as 1 divided by sine of 1.3875. Type it into your calculator just like that, 1 divided by sine. And just like the others, I'm going to round to 4 decimal places, 1.0170. Okay, last but not least, I have a cotangent. Cotangent, if you remember, is also not in the calculator, but I can rewrite this as 1 divided by the tangent. And I'm going to put it into the calculator just like you see it here, 1 divided by tangent. Okay, and you can see I get negative 3.8665. Okay, these are the assigned problems for this assignment set. This first part will be a unit circle. You'll want to use your unit circle. The second part will be the calculator. Just make sure your calculator is in degree mode. Have a great day.